Thank you everyone for joining us for this session of Webinar Wednesday. Today we will be discussing the steps to deploy your GIS layers for viewing purposes to GeoSync Go Plus. As you know, or may not, today the product we will be using, the GeoSync Go Plus, is the latest and greatest addition to the GeoSync Go family of products. It is available as a installable application on iOS, Android, and Windows. It's a web-based app. You can also access the web-hosted app from a URL, which we'll discuss later. To get to to deploy your GIS data to base layers in GeoSync Go, we will utilize the administrative tools in GeoSync Go Plus. So the first thing we need to do, obviously, is open GeoSync Go Plus. There are two different ways to get to the application. One, you can download and install the app on iOS, Android, or Windows operating systems, or you can use a browser to go to https://geosyncgo.com/go and use the web-hosted app. We recommend using Chrome for the browser for the web-hosted app. Once the app is open, you'll need to log in with username and password, and the user that you use for this will have to have administrative rights. Your user has to have administrative rights to access the account management tools that we'll need. So once you type in your username and password, and sign in. At this point, the Choose Project screen opens up. Of course, at this point, we don't really want to go into a project. We want to go to our account management tools. To do that, we'll select the account menu at the bottom, or button at the bottom right. That will take us to our management tools. The management tools that we'll be using today are sources, layers, and projects. So first we'll start with the sources. We need to make a connection to our data sources so we can actually create a layer from that data. To get there, from the management tool screen, you select sources, the sources menu. If your device is a landscape screen, your menu will look like this. If you have a portrait style, so you're on a tablet and your display is a portrait, it'll look a little different. In that case, you may have to, one extra step, go to the menu button and then select sources. But either way, once you select sources, you'll go to the management tools sources page. So we have some data sources already in our account. We want to add, as an example, we want to add a new data source to create a layer from. So we'll select a new button from the sources screen. That will take us to a new sources page or display. We'll be discussing about 4 different types of data sources today. The first data source we'll look at is the MapSync GSE, basically the standard GeoSync Go layer format that you would see in GeoSync Go Desktop or GeoSync Go Mobile, so your XML layer. So in this case, on the right under Type is where you select your data source type. As I mentioned, this time we're looking at the MapSync GSE XML file. So I've selected that. For the XMLs, you'll want to browse to and select the actual XML layer on your machine. So if I select the Attach button, it'll open the Windows Explorer style browser, and I will browse to my layer that I want to add as a source. In this case, I'm using a parcel layer. So you'll see my GeoSync Go project, GeoSearch layers, and I've selected the parcel GSE XML. And of course, the name, you'll want to give a name for this data source. So once you've selected, given a name, selected the type, and select the actual data source, then you have to obviously save this setting. So the save button is at the bottom right here. Now another data source, now that once we save, that data source will be ready to use in a layer in a project. Another type of data source that we have access to is our MapSync Cloud SQL. So these are SQL databases that are stored in your cloud account. There are two different types of MapSync Cloud SQL databases. One is your workflow. The workflow is a SQL database. We'll get into workflows a little more later, but that's a GeoSync Go cloud-based managed data set that we have once we can do reports, and that's our full-blown GeoSync Go managed data. So if you have a GeoSync Go workflow, you can select, for the type, you would select MapSync Cloud SQL. For the database list, you would select workflow. We want to access our workflow database. Once we have our workflow database, then we would select the table that has the data for the data source. In this case, I'm using code enforcement. So I've selected my code enforcement table, and I've named this data source codes ENF. The names in all these data sources can be whatever you prefer. You have it's not, you just don't want to be descriptive on something that you will recognize. You don't want to use spaces in this, though, in the names, by the way. So once I've created this codes ENF data source from my workflow database, I'll save that. Another type of data source, the second MapSync Cloud SQL data source, is our GIS layers. When you select, you want to use one of the GIS layer databases, and this would be what you would, for instance, similar to the database you would use for your base layers in GeoSync Go Desktop. What this particularly is for is if you have GIS data that is not necessarily a GeoSync Go managed data set, not a workflow, but you've got other GIS data that you want to push out into the cloud and use in GeoSync Go. Of course, and we'll look at, there are the steps to create that. That's a separate webinar, but you'll notice there'll be a GIS 1, 2, 3, and 4 selection for the database. And as you create those, when you export or create those databases, you'll know which one that you have available. So in this case, I've selected my GIS 1 for my GIS layers. In the table, I've selected my structures layer, GIS layer structures, and given it a name of structures. With the rest, you select the Save button to save that setting. The fourth and final data set that we'll have for today is we can actually utilize ArcGIS feature service. And to set one of these up, you select for the type, you would select ArcGIS feature service. Of course, you want to give, as with the rest, you want to have enter a name. You want to name your data source. And for the ArcGIS feature service, you'll need to enter the URL for that service. Now, this has to be exactly as it is for that service, case sensitive and all. So it has to be an exact URL. One little piece wrong, it won't show up. Just as a note, you'll notice the outputs GeoJSON. If when you first create this data source, that will be turned on. So you'll need to, after you say this, edit it again and turn that off, unless you're using ArcGIS 10.4 and it is actually outputting GeoJSON. But by default, that gets turned on, so you'll need to go back. Once we save this, select Edit and turn that off. So now we actually have we have 4 data sources set up, named, created. The next step, we'll want to create layers and utilize the data from those data sources to create layers. That is another admin tool that we'll utilize. So once you save your sources, it drops you back to the main management tool screen. At this point, we want to select layers, and we will actually create layers from these data sources. To do this, again, the layers are not available yet for the data sources that we just created. So I'll select New, and we have, for a layer, you have three different tabs, if you will, for the settings. First thing you need to do is give the layer a name, and it does not have to be the same name as the data source. You can use a name that makes sense for the project or the map that you're putting together. Your data type, for now and until we get into some advanced stuff, will be a base layer. So by the standard, you want to use base layer. You can actually set the minimum and maximum zoom for the layer when it turns on and turns off. We can set the draw limit. The default is 500, so it won't, the features won't draw if there are more than 500 features visible on the screen. They'll draw once you actually zoom in close enough to where there are 500 or less. So, but that can be adjusted from 0 to 1,000. Right, it's 1 to 1,000. Draw priority. This is your layering. This parcels layer, I want it to be lower in the list. I want it not necessarily. I want things to be below other features. So I've set it at 3, so it's a little further down in the list. Disable dynamic zooming. Don't check that. That's another advanced topic we'll look at later. Initially toggled off, you can actually have a layer where it is not on when you first open your project. If you select this when you open your project, this layer would be off. I have left this turned off, so it will be, it's not checked, so this will be on when we open our project. The next step, source, the next tab, our source tab. We have to define what source we're using for this layer. Under the source drop-down, so I've selected parcels for my parcels layer. You will select a label field for if we actually label this layer, it will need to know which field to label. So you always have to select a label field. If you don't, when you try to save, it'll say you don't have a label field. You can filter the source. We won't get into that. Filtering would be a more advanced topic. The next thing we want to look at will be the style. What style do we want to use for this layer? I've selected my orange polygon with no field. It's just a style that's been set up. It's kind of a generic style that's used. We can also have conditional styles based on fields, but again, that's an advanced topic. For now, we just want to use one style for the entire layer. Once I've selected that, gone through all the settings, I'll select the Save button to save this layer. Now, you would go through this exact same process for every one of the features that we just set up, or the data sources. The layer is very similar. You give it a name, you pick the general settings, pick your source, and the style to go along with that layer. So once we save, that'll take us back to the main menu. And on layers, if you mentioned, if you need to make a change to a layer, maybe I want to change the minimum zoom or the maximum zoom, simply select a layer from the list and click Edit. It'll open back up the full settings. You can change all the settings for that menu. If you no longer need this layer, you can delete it from here. To delete a layer, though, you will have to actually it will have to be removed from a project before it's deleted, and it will warn you of that. So if you see that warning, that means, hey, I've got this layer in a project. I need to go and actually remove it from the project before I can delete it. So the next step we want to look at to deploy this to our GeoSync Go mapping, we've created our sources, or we've actually connected to our data sources. We have created layers for those data sources, and now to view those layers in a map, we'll need to assign them to a project. to a map project. And for that, we'll use the projects menu of the management tools, GeoSync Go Plus management tools. At the very end, simply select project, just like the rest of the tools we've looked at. And oops, a little mix up here. First, we were looking at creating well, actually, we've already got a project. I'm going into creating new projects. We're going to add these layers to our MapSync Village project. So I've selected that project listing. Select Edit. We go to our layers. You'll have a drop down to select a specific layer. Click the Add button. It adds that layer to the list of layers that are available that will be available in this map. So this is actually your list of layers that we've added our layers that we just created to this particular project. To remove a layer, you simply click the X on the list. It takes that layer out. As with the rest of the settings, save or it will not take effect. So we save our project with the new layers. At this point, we'll want to review our map. You can go back. Actually, you can go back and change styles or layers or add or remove from projects, whatever you need to do for your map project. But for today's purposes, we want to now go look at our map. So we'll use the menu context, 3 buttons on the right, and we should sign out, but that'll take us all the way out. We're already signed in, so we'll use the Home button. It'll take us back to our home screen, where we'll select our MapSync Village project and view what we just created. Here are the parcels that we added, the data source and the layers. Here are the code enforcement. Here's the Mesonet, the Kentucky weather and the climate data layer. So that's how you add your GIS layers to your GeoSync Go Plus project. And that's all I have for this session. Thanks again.